the discussion we're going to have, to the extent that I'm an incredibly biased observer by virtue A of my age and B of my interests. Late Ibsen plays and late Shakespeare are the most powerful works in the dramatic canon for me. So I'm hoping we can throw some light on some of these matters today. But before we begin the panel, I want to call your attention to the art show, The Matter of Time, which was put up in contingent, in adjacent to or in relation to our panel on time 2 weeks ago. All Philoctetes shows are not merely decorative, but are developed to accompany the roundtables that we have here at Philoctetes. And this one, which was curated by Hallie Cohn, Adam Ludwig, and Olga Ast, features the work of John Boone, Catherine Davis, Edward Johnson, Elliot Kaufman, Catherine Rogers, Linda Stillman, and Ellen Weiner, who's, what is that her work called, Hallie, exactly, against the wall?
Contemporary Book of Hours and her journey diary.
So take a look at the walls, and it's really quite a magnificent show, if I don't say so. Please go to philoctetes.org for a calendar of all of our programs. This is the last program of the fall season. We are going to continue existing. We just got a $2,500 gift from Rainius Capital yesterday. New York State Council on the Arts is giving us grants in poetry and in music. The Department of Cultural Affairs in part supports what we're seeing here today. But we need your help. As I've said before, governmental agencies give small grants and they're all program oriented. So what we need is we need money to cover our operating costs. So we need you, we need little gifts, we need big gifts. We need gifts to survive, but they are coming in, we are surviving, but we are going to need more every month just to keep going. Now, I did want to announce that in January, we'll be having, January and February, we have really interesting activities coming up. There will be a roundtable with Akhil Belgrami of Columbia's Heyman Center on the Enlightenment and the Counter-Enlightenment, and centering on Isaiah Berlin, really, and the philosopher John Rawls. Another roundtable that we're very excited about is related to a collection of films that the Museum of Modern Art has on the work of Joseph Cornell and with Joseph Cornell. These are films that I believe some of them were made by Joseph Cornell. I'm not sure the exact provenance of the films, but they're extraordinary films. They haven't been seen by anybody. They're going to be shown here at Philoctetes, and we're going to be having an incredible roundtable with Marion Cause from the City University Graduate Center, and a number of other people who are conversant in the work of Joseph Cornell, including the curator at the Museum of Modern Art. So in any case, before, I think that about takes care of it, and I'm now pleased to introduce Patricia Bloom. Patricia Bloom is Associate Professor of Geriatrics and Internal Medicine at Mount Sinai School of Medicine and the Director of Integrative Health Programs at the Martha Stewart Center for Living at Mount Sinai Medical Center. Her major interests are the promotion of healthy aging, integrative health, stress reduction, can I see you afterwards? And dementia, an area I also need some work on. She is a registered yoga teacher and teacher of mindfulness-based stress reduction. She has been involved in geriatric care, teaching, and research for over 30 years. She has been cited by New York Magazine every year since 1998 as one of the best geriatricians in New York. Patricia Bloom will moderate this afternoon's panel and introduce our other distinguished guests.
Thank you, Francis, for those kind words. Can everyone hear me? Okay. Okay, I'll try to speak up a little bit. If anyone needs me to speak up, be sure to give me the hand sign. So I'm just thrilled to be here this afternoon. I may be somewhat unique in the room in being a newcomer to these discussions, but it's obvious to me from the large turnout, despite the snow flying outside, I think, that you're all as excited as I am to be here. It's just such an honor to be on this distinguished panel, and I thought I would just tell you a little anecdote before I introduce the panelists. Quite a few years ago, when I was a junior faculty person at Albert Einstein, a young woman was coming to train with us in internal medicine, and I found out that she had been a dancer with Twyla Tharp. And I said to her, you were a dancer with Twyla Tharp, and you're becoming a doctor. Aren't you going in the wrong direction? So suffice it to say, if I fail to achieve enlightenment in this lifetime and I'm consigned to reincarnation, I hope that I come back as an artist in one of your fields. It would be just thrilling. So we have joining us today, and I know you have the notes here, but I just wanted to highlight some of our panelists' experience. Carmen de Lavallade, we're thrilled to have with us. She's a dancer, actress, and choreographer with really just a long list of accomplishments and honors. She performed with and choreographed with Alvin Ailey. She's been on Broadway. She was the prima ballerina for the Metropolitan Opera, and then joined the Yale Repertory Theater as an actor and teacher. And my gosh, she's just has too many credits here for me to keep track of them. She's been in several major motion pictures. She is the recipient of an honorary Doctor of Fine Arts from the Boston Conservatory of Music, Adelphi University, and a number of other institutions. And she has been named as the Ellington Fellow at Yale University and a Doctor of Humane Letters from Metropolitan College. So we're just thrilled to have you with us, Carmen. It's really an honor. Then we have Audrey Flack here on my right. As you can see, we have just such a nice diversity of interests. Audrey is a pioneer in the field of photorealism and a nationally recognized painter and sculptor. Her works are contained in many of the major museums from around the world: the Metropolitan, MoMA, the Guggenheim, the Whitney, National Museum of Art in Australia. She has a graduate degree and an honorary doctorate from Cooper Union in New York City and a BFA from Yale. She has been honored by Cooper Union, Bridgeport University. She won the 2007 Sigfield Prize for Art Education and is an honorary professor at George Washington and currently visiting professor at the University of Pennsylvania. And last but certainly not least, an accomplished banjo player. Are you going to play for us?
She played here.
So welcome to Audrey. I'll get to Gordon in a minute. A very nice little sidelight is that these two went to high school together and haven't seen each other since then. So it's a reunion for them. So that's great. On my left, we have Elinor Fuchs, an award-winning playwright and nationally recognized theater critic. She has lectured widely on Alzheimer's and creativity, so I hope you'll say some things about that. Editor of 5 books and
author and editor.
Oh, sorry. Author and editor of 5 books, absolutely, including The Death of Character, for which she won the George Jean Nathan Award for Dramatic Criticism, and a memoir about her mother making an exit, which I think is recently published and is available to any of you that are interested. She's had reviews and essays appear in many leading journals and newspapers, in many scholarly anthologies and journals. She's currently professor of dramaturgy and dramatic criticism at the Yale School of Drama, has also taught at Columbia and Harvard, and is recently the recipient of the Betty Jean Jones Award for Outstanding Teacher of American Theater. Wow. Given annually by the American Drama and Theater Society. So welcome to you. That's fantastic. And then last but certainly not least, we have Gordon Rogoff, who is a professor of dramaturgy and dramatic criticism at Yale, at the Yale School of Drama.
Still another.
Right. Author of Theater is Not Safe and Vanishing Acts. He also is the recipient of the George Jean Nathan Award for Dramatic Criticism and the Morton Darwin Zabel Award in Criticism from the American Academy of Arts and Letters. He's a Guggenheim Fellow. Again, many credits. Has written a number of books. So we certainly welcome your participation. Glad to have you. And we also have in the circle John Ryan. Welcome to John. He is a family member and...
I carried the books over to them. Wouldn't have to go downstairs.
But also a philosopher and psychoanalyst, I believe. So very wonderful to have you participating as well. So you can see that we have many sources of wonderful commentary. We're going to have a discussion among the panelists for a while, and then a little bit later we'll be throwing it open to the audience. So I thought I would just start off by maybe throwing out a question. It is said that some things actually improve with aging. I guess fine wine comes to mind, but even some of the human experience is said to improve with aging. Some women would contend that sex gets better as you get older, you know, when the kids aren't knocking on the door, and perhaps you have more time to relax in your life. But other aspects of cognition as well, equanimity perhaps, wisdom is said to improve with aging. So I wondered if the panelists, in any order that you see fit, might think about your own fields and specifically about the aging process. What about the aging process do you think have you seen make an impact on artists in your field? You know, possibly for the positive, but we would also welcome your comments in any way that you think aging impacts negatively on creativity. And also including with that, I think the idea of society's reaction to the creative process among artists as they get older. So who would like to begin?
Well, surely, if you start as a dancer, it's going to be physical. But that doesn't mean that you stop. I know that most dancers today, most dancers today will stop dancing when they're in their 40s. You know, they'd start thinking of themselves as old at 40. And when I was coming up, I was watching Martha Graham and Jose Limon and all. They were more than 40, you know. And to me, particularly Martha. And so it never dawned on me to stop. I mean, I have to adjust. I think we adjust. But I always found that you know, when you're young, you have that facility, and it's fun to use all that energy. But as you get older, certain things take over, and it gets more tuned. You don't have to throw your leg over your head to say what you want to say. I mean, the language, let's say the vocabulary changes. The vocabulary changes, and that happened to me recently when I had one piece that I used to do the creation where I would speak and move, but I had my full body move, and I loved to do the body, and the words came along and whatnot. Well, I had a job at a film, and I had to go up and down stairs for about 4 hours, no, about 5 hours without stopping. So with that, when I got back from the shoot, my legs are out. They just wouldn't speak, and I had to perform in a day, and nothing would happen. No matter what I said to them, they wouldn't move. And then I realized, well, I've got to change. Nobody knows it's a solo, so I can do what I want. Then in comes creativity. So I thought, well, it's really about the words, isn't it? So the words took over, and the body was secondary the first time, and I liked it better. It was richer and warmer, and then all of a sudden I heard the words really for the first time, because when you have your body, it feels so good when a leg goes up, you know, and you're focused more on physicality. But when you're putting the words and the movement together, I'm finding the words become more important for me now. The physicality is great because I can add nuance that helps it, you see, so that it's not standing still. There's also, the body reacts certain ways. It has its way when in sorrow, the body does something. We dance all the time, only we don't know it. You know, because, and I can always tell the body will react for sorrow and happiness and all that. But so for me, of course, dancers are physical, but for me, I think it's not over. Most people discourage. And I'm finding now that a lot of dancers that are, I don't like to say older, they've just been around longer, really love moving their bodies. And they come up with some wonderful, wonderful things. But psychologically, in our society, I'm just finding that they're sort of tolerated in a certain kind of way, you know. But I do find that the young people look up to you and they learn a lot by looking at things being not so physical. Because they have to learn that the experience gives a richness to your performance. You're not so caught up in how gorgeous I look. Anyway, that's for the performing artists. But
Wonderful. So I think I heard you say also that you were talking about portraying human experiences, sadness, happiness. So a sense that having experienced those to a greader depth as one gets older allows a richer expression of those in your work.
yes.
Yeah.
Yes, because the body reacts. You know, you can use when somebody gives you a movement, and the first thing you do, somebody says a hand or this, and they're trying to do a hand or whatever, and it's not that at all. It's if it's a sadness or something, that comes from the gut. Therefore, something's going to happen in the body, and you put a violin against that, and something happens.
Thank you.
My work at the moment is on a book of really 5 related essays. And the working title comes from a comment made by Henry James. It's called Sunset Over Ice, and it's late works by Verdi, Ibsen, Richard Strauss, Matisse, and Ingmar Bergman. And what James said in the review of Ibsen's penultimate drama, John Gabriel Borkman, is that he found the background of the play, at any rate, is the sunset over the ice. He said a lot more, and it's in my essay about Ibsen, which has been completed. So I'm about halfway through. I've had Verdi published in Parnassus, and the Ibsen is coming out in the next Yale Review. But oddly enough, it occurs to me, because Carmen started, so it's someplace where I haven't even thought to go, which was with the physical and with the dance. To go into that part of my life about which I'm probably harbor the most affection, and that's when I tried to act as an entrance into the drama and the theater, but at some point there were 2 things that restrained me. One was that I really didn't think I was any good, and then the other was that I recognized, and I talked to Alvin Epstein, who is now 84, about this, that if I was in a play 8 performances a week, I could never go to the concerts and the other plays and the dances that I wanted to go to. I would be constantly unable to do this. And in fact, I mean to speak to Alvin again, because he's embarking on a tour for 6 months with Sam Mendes' group at the Bridge Project.
He's been here a couple of times.
I know, and he's going to be away 6 months, never going to anybody else's performances. And I know that will be a loss for him, because he usually joins friends of mine and myself, particularly at concerts, and sometimes the opera, but mostly at concerts. Some of us are all Mahler nuts by now, which may play into the Ich liebe Gustav, so play into the late works thing. But again, Mahler is not directly in my study at the moment. But speaking of Alvin, then brings me into one comment which is one of my favorite actors, and it was criticized by this physical thing that comes up by Kenneth Tynan as being the greatest actor we have from the neck up, and that was John Gielgud. And Gielgud was in a group. This could be apocryphal, but I know a lot of actors, English actors especially too, and I think it may not be apocryphal, might be really real, who were sitting around together, and they included then the late Alan Bates, Maggie Smith, Joan Plowright, and John Gielgud, and it might have been Judi Dench, I'm not sure of that. And at one point, they were mourning their lost opportunities and how many roles they're not getting anymore. And when it came to Gielgud saying, well, what do you have to say about it, John? He said, well, I haven't worked in at least a month. He says, do you think I should get a new agent? And I keep this as a flag above me that it's possible to just ignore all the signs, whether they are the physical ones or the social scene itself, which is what it is, the business, which tends to reject anybody really over 60 or 65 which is something that you live with, and I think it shouldn't be discounted in this kind of a discussion, that you have a sense of being isolated. I come back then finally in the study to insist that I don't have a theory about this, and I don't, and yet I keep saying that research is itself a form of discovery that is essential for writing. And my engagement is always with the research on a particular one. That's on Verdi and on Ibsen. It's have been accomplished. And on top of that, I've been teaching the substance of this as a course, but this semester, because one of my colleagues, Mark Robinson, suggested, why don't you teach what you write? And I've never done that before. And it's turned out to be really the most important teaching experience of my life, and it's been going on since 1962, so that's a kind of long time for me to suddenly arrive at a point in teaching, which I don't think is my best métier. Actually, I think writing is really where I belong, but I don't write enough, and I never do. I never have. That will be a lasting regret. So I will live with that. But in teaching this, I've found that one theme pervades. I've just read 2 final papers of the group that are coming in, and it seems that it must have been conveyed in the course that most of these figures, with the probable exception of Richard Strauss, in the line that I used about Verdi at the end with Falstaff, becomes a boy again. And Matisse, too, spoke of the necessity you must become a child. Recover your childhood. I have a feeling you have the same, Audrey, same thing to say is that. It applies to, certainly Ingmar Bergman has said it, and you might argue that Ibsen was old when he began, like Beethoven, but even Ibsen, of course, with his craving for young women, I think unrealized. Nevertheless, the imagination was going there, and that was part of the drama. The drama was always to break the form. That's really what happened. And in breaking the form, and they all do that, in breaking the form to find another dimension and possibly another sense of what life can lead the individual to. Sometimes it's not so attractive. The individual is not that interested in the rest of life. It's become too much of a torment and too haunting. Certainly for Strauss, and who will always be controversial because of his staying in Germany at the time. It was what Adorno called, about late works, a catastrophe. The catastrophe was that he actually believed he could continue as he was under the Nazis, only to discover, really as early as 35, 36 certainly, that it was impossible. And for the rest, it was a grievance for the lost world, particularly of the 19th century. And that never changed. It brought him to the final few years in which all he was doing, besides writing music, which was continual, was reading Goethe. Goethe, for all about, particularly the Metamorphoses, which led to the creation of what I think is perhaps his most fascinating and profound work, the Metamorphosen for string orchestra. Well, really 26 strings, I think it is altogether. A remarkable work in itself. And again, I really will stop. It's a model of contrapuntalism. And similarly, in a strange way, Verdi, becoming a boy as he was doing what I think is really his greatest opera, and a complete departure, really, musically, from the other operas, because he breaks up the form step by step, including showing, in a kind of virtuosic way, I can write an aria that takes only 30 seconds. And I defy you, the audience, to applaud that. You won't, and you can't. There is that sense that what he really was playing with for the last part of his life was the fugue. And so he ends the opera with this joke. I call the piece Verdi's cosmic jokes, really. He ends it with a joke, a fugue about the ridiculousness, the absurdity of of all human experience. And
Gordon,
I'll
one
stop
question, you
there.
said so many interesting things, but on the matter of Ibsen, aren't there some similarities to the innovativeness of his early career with Peer Gynt?
Yes.
And later?
Yes,
I mean,
I think
because
so.
you said you have to be a boy again, you know?
yeah, I think Peer Gynt was written as a dramatic poem, and it turns out, of course, to be a perfectly playable play. It really is
Yeah.
long, perhaps,
Yeah.
but I don't mind length. I love it, actually. Yes, it is a kind of return to that. But he has to slog through the sense of obligation, which I think is one of the killing things. It didn't kill him, but it was a wounding factor in some of the plays which were never quite working. And we're lucky enough that he lasted as long as he did. He lasted until his stroke. He had 5 years of really serious disability, almost an incapacity to talk
How
very
old
much
was
at all.
he, Gordon?
He was, how old is he? Elinor?
When he died?
Yes,
Yeah.
70.
Wow, this is loud.
Yeah,
Wasn't he 77?
77. I
This has
think.
got to be turned down, yeah.
And
So
seven-
that would mean that he wrote When We Dead Awaken at
That's-
71?
Yes, he's
And Borkman at 69?
69 to 70, yes.
After we've all talked, Gordon, we must talk about what he was saying about age and creativity in those last two plays.
Yes, okay.
You know, I mean,
All
if he was becoming a boy, what was he saying about that?
And did he
I mean-
continue to be productive after his stroke?
No.
Or was that kind of the end
no,
of
that
his
was really the end.
I mean, a lot of ice.
Yes.
But I don't know about the sun. A lot of ice.
A lot of eyes, yes.
Yeah.
Well, it's in the play.
We'll come back to that.
Yes.
We'll come back.
Okay.
Because I agree
Good
with
point.
Francis, you brought up so many interesting
Yeah.
ideas about what the different artists, the ways they changed and
Yeah.
left things behind or came back to their youth. So I think we'll want to explore some of those
Okay.
ideas some more. That's great. Audrey
Oh.
or Elinor?
Well, hi. Gordon and I have not seen each other since 1948. And he still looks like Gordon. He said I still look like myself. Now, how many years is that? I can't add.
Okay.
That's 61.
61 years.
So we have the essence of ourselves.
Yeah.
But I think I'm a little bit younger. I skipped. So,
What high school they want to know?
Music and Art High School. We can
Yay.
sing the school song, which was Brahms'
Brahms, the last
Brahms-
movement of Brahms' First Symphony.
First Symphony. If
No, no.
are you a music and arter? Who are you?
Oh, here.
He's raising his hand because he
Oh, you
needs
want
you
to
to speak
hear me?
louder.
I thought you'd like to sing with us. And I remembered all the lyrics.
Yes.
You a music
Music
and
and
arter?
art.
What year?
57.
Ah, we don't talk to her. 48.
There's another one here.
Where's another one? A mere infant. Music. What did you play? Gloria Davies.
Yes, she was a
in our
soprano, yeah.
class. Max Frankel was there. It was a wonderful school.
Alvin actually graduated from my sister's class in the class of 1942. And they had a reunion a few years ago.
Well, I didn't know what we were supposed to do. It's a good discussion, and I want to talk about beauty, because I think you're absolutely beautiful. But overall about aging and creativity, I wrote this notes on creating, and I brought a couple of them. It's been in print a long time.
Art and Soul, I see.
Art
is
and
the
Soul.
name.
It's called Art and Soul. It's just notes on creativity. So I thought it was appropriate to bring it. Certain kinds of genius emerge early, like mathematicians, and very often musicians, like Mozart at the age of 4. Through some form of genetic lineage, they carry within them the seeds of highly computed information. They can start at 5 years of age and complete at 20. And very often mathematicians, that happens to them. But for the most part, vision appears to each of us. Of course, the book is for artists and writers and dancers and musicians. But for most
Or
of
would-be
us,
artists, musicians,
Well-
and dancers. Maybe?
yeah, well, anybody, any creative soul. But it's For the most part, vision appears to each of us according to the linear span of our own life. Some peak early, some late. I'm wondering about dancers, by the way, too. Some at a steady, even pace. We seem to have no choice as to when it happens. Each artist develops differently. There is the phenomenon of Van Gogh. We say Van Gogh, who starts to paint very late in life. You know, he dies at 37. All of his great paintings were done in 4 years. Now, he's young, right? He achieves miraculous results in 4 years. But Masaccio changes the history of art by the time he reaches 27 and dies. And Mozart, we know, 33. Then there's Titian, 99, Tintoretto, Michelangelo. And their talents bloomed. I guess what I was saying here is, depending on how long you live, you've got to do it then. And if you have a longer lifespan, good luck. You know, you keep doing it. And we're talking about the longer lifespan, hopefully. And when you said you don't worry so much about how you look, I thought about how I love looking at faces, you know, and I love looking at real faces, the beauty in real faces. And about aging, I did every once in a while I have to do a self-portrait, whether it's sculpture or painting. And I age. And, now, sometimes I stop and the painting's finished, and it's finished at whatever age I was. I did a sculpture and at a particularly difficult time, a self-portrait, and I should have stopped, but I kept working on it and it kept aging. It was like Dorian Gray. Dorian Gray.
Going in the wrong direction.
Older and older. And I lost all of those interim steps. I should have made separate ones. And I finally couldn't stand it, and it smashed. But, you know, in terms of aging and creativity, you know that late Rembrandt self-portrait? I mean, all of those late ones that break your heart, that I stand in front of and I talk to because they cut across time, that they speak to each of us. He could not have done any. There's one that is pathetic. You know the one where he looks like an idiot? You know, he looks like a laughing moron, you know, monkey, dope, something. And could a young artist have done that? No way, no way. So there's a wisdom that we gather. There are cataracts that we get. And I think one has to be careful because Monet's late paintings in the Marmottan are not great paintings. They're cataract paintings. They're all brown. And if he had had a good ophthalmologist that gave him some lenses, we wouldn't have those paintings.
But can I just ask, because your progression sort of stopped in middle age.
I go all over.
So what about the artists who really emerged in late life? What do you think allowed them to find brilliance in late life?
I'm just talking about painters. I don't think painters and sculptors, I don't think they just emerge in late life. I think they're always that. It's inside. When their great work happens, the greatest work happens, but it's always there. It's not like a mathematician who they've got to catch it. By the 20, they forget it.
Well, then let's say...
Or an athlete, you know? It's hard with athletes. I loved what you said about dancing.
Well, I didn't start till I was 14, and that's
didn't start?
relatively no. I didn't start till I was 14, and but because I'm from Los Angeles, California, and at that time it was not particularly easy for a person of color to have classes and whatnot. My cousin was Janet Collins, and she became the first person of color at the Metropolitan Opera. She worked with Tally Beatty and Catherine Dunham, but Janet was a soloist also. She was quite extraordinary, and Ballet Russe wanted to use her, but they wouldn't use her unless she lightened her skin. She wasn't going to do that. So it was hard times, you know. So, but anyway, I got a scholarship with Lester Horton. But I was about 14. No, I started ballet classes, Melissa Blake, about 14.
Isn't
Got a
that
scholarship.
unusual for a dancer?
Yeah, most kids start very young, you know. But I mean, if you have I didn't know if I had the ability. I was copying myself after Janet. I wanted to be like Janet, you know. At least I had something to look toward, you know. Some body was there, and then when I got into Lester's company, I was about 16 or something like
Carmen,
that.
somebody
Yes.
here is saying they can't hear
Oh,
you.
16. Now they can put this one up. So I was about 16 years old. When I really started, I got the scholarship at 16, and by the time I was 17, I really worked hard. I don't know, I had the desire, I suppose, and pretty soon I was the lead dancer in a couple of years. But that's maybe it was already there, it just needed tapping.
Well, I think it was not only there. You had a physicality which you still have. The minute I saw you, I knew you were a dancer. You know,
Yeah.
so you had to have had that.
Well,
I don't
sometimes the
mean
men
as an
start
artist
later.
or a writer. You don't
men
need
start
that
later?
physicality.
Men start later. And they move very quickly, too.
I might be like a little puppy with a toy, but I still want to go back to the idea of talking about artistic expression in later life. Can you think of examples of artists who continued to have great work as they became very elderly, and or are there examples of people who perhaps had artistic ability, but you know, they had to put bread on the table, so they had another career, and then when they were relieved of those responsibilities, their artistic creativity emerged?
If we're talking about great artists, not great artists find a way to work, whether you have to put bread on the table, whether you eat Heinz baked beans, you know, or I used to go into the Sagamore cafeteria opposite Cooper Union, and Franz Klein and Pollock and all those guys. I was a student at Heinz. We put ketchup in water. That's what you had, you know, and you had a roll. Of course, you know, your work can get better. I think you don't have the physical stamina you had in your youth. I mean, I do huge public sculpture, but I'm going to have someone else make a big armature for me now. When I was younger, I thought nothing of, you know, getting a big piece of steel, climbing on scaffolds. I'll get on a scaffold now, but I need a scissor lift, you know, to get me up and down. So there are physical things you have to deal with. But I think it's the what you know, and it's your wisdom, and it's your accumulation of knowledge and vision and human insight that can get into your work that kids, they don't have. You know,
Okay.
they have something else.
Because I think that's what I was hoping you would go toward. And I want to hear from Elinor first, but I would like to, I guess for the benefit of all of us who are, you know, contemplating the aging process, I think that's a theme I'd like to explore a little bit more too, is, you know, with aging, I mean, because the stereotype, of course, is that everything gets worse and your, you know, whatever it is that you do declines as you get older. So I'm very interested in the concept that there's that potential for for growth and
Oh, my goodness,
improved
absolutely.
expression with, and what is it about aging that somehow can bring that out, so we all don't
Just
go
what
away
is-
with
Well,
a
late
go ahead.
Cézanne, for instance, I guess
These
many
late
people...
watercolors are the most magnificent things
Absolutely.
in the world.
And I guess, I mean, this is your field, but this is the introduction to Cubism, right? Inspiration for Cubism. How many people here saw the Louise Bourgeois show? It was
90, what is she, 99?
She's in her 90s. And the late work was absolutely stunning.
She has other people do it. I've worked at foundries, so
Well-
that is a physical limitation that she has. She has other people carve, she has other people weld. You know.
She has other people do the actual physical work, but is it her inspiration that she's
Of course.
directing?
Yeah.
Well,
Elinor,
so did all those
let's hear
Renaissance.
from their field, and then we'll go into this a little bit more.
My field is theater, like Gordon's, and we are colleagues at Yale. But I have this other little flange to my career, which is that when my unusual mother was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, because I'm a writer, I began to take notes. And I began to take notes to keep myself sane. And then she, as her language began to deteriorate, now I'll put that in quotation marks, I thought it was so extraordinary, and this was probably because of my theater training. I'm listening to my mother and I'm thinking, my God, she's sounding like Beckett. My God, she's sounding like Gertrude Stein. And if Gertrude Stein can repeat and repeat and repeat, we would call that art, why can't Mother? So I began to carry a little micro cassette tape recorder with me, and because I just wanted to capture some of these things that were extremely hard to remember because they weren't rational. I mean, you didn't know when Mother said there's been a lot of writing and whiting, and she would do rhymes and so forth. These are long conversations often. Depending upon whether you saw that writing as W-R-I-T-I-N-G, W-R-I-G-H-T-I-N-G, R-I-T-I-N-G, you would get kind of exploding senses there. And I thought, this is so creative. So as it happened, the book was published in '05, and I've been told, I should say, that I have some copies here, but anyhow, the book was published, and I became enlisted in speaking at conferences that were about creativity and dementia. And I didn't understand for a while that I had entered a battle zone. And so I just want to say something about what is the situation today, the thinking about people with cognitive loss and creativity. It's not so long since people with dementia were chained to their beds. And then it was a tremendous movement of enlightenment and humanitarianism to get them off a zillion drugs, and they often were in better shape after that. And there were always certain amount of art therapies just to, keep the old folks entertained. But something ideological has happened in the last few years, and my book just happened to come out at this time, which is that there is a movement within dementia care that's claiming creativity for people with cognitive loss, and specifically Alzheimer's, and is setting itself against, it's not just merely entertainment, it's setting itself against the total medicalization of Alzheimer's, setting itself against big pharma that only can talk in terms of a medical cure, setting itself against big philanthropy that wants to advertise dementia as a catastrophic so that they can raise more and more money. That's the theme of these creativity conferences. And setting itself against normative nursing home care, which is always a little bit demeaning and absolutely follows the model of decline, the model of loss, and the model of irrecoverability. So, led by a doctor in Cleveland who's very well known. His name is Peter Whitehead. I don't know if anybody here knows. I'm sure you do.
Whitehouse.
Whitehouse. Thank you. Yeah. His books. Somebody who is involved in storytelling and drama named Ann Basting, and several other people. There is a tremendous energy to use creativity as almost like a battering ram to fight against these normative views of decline and loss and tragedy and the loss of selfhood and the loss of personhood. So I've been at conferences that talk about just those things, selfhood, creativity, and it is not clear totally to me whether or not in that field the leaders actually believe that they see full functioning creativity in people with dementia. I mean, I think I would say that maybe is not an issue that interests them so much, because I think they would be saying, well, you know, but okay, what do you mean by creativity? Do we only reserve it for works that kind of fit the market model of what is a work of art? And I think they're looking at creativity in terms of a spectrum of potentiality in human beings that is being lost in this whole dimension, in this whole population of people with dementia. That there is so much more going on there, and so much more potential if socially people with cognitive loss are fully recognized as, I mean, it's a cliche to say it, as human beings, but they're often not. I indeed heard my mother very late in her life say to a young man who was helping her, "I am a human being, you know." Well, I myself found creativity and personhood in my 10, 12 years of caregiving. Many of these conversations I actually put in the book that I wrote, Making an Exit. If we have time, I'll maybe give you a few examples later. And I think that the whole issue of seeing creativity, defining creativity, is opened up by looking at people who are in that category. So you know, I realize what I'm saying is a slight shift of the conversation from professional artists.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate your bringing in that aspect of it, and I think it's. I wanted to just comment on something that's sort of related that I'm interested in, and then I think it'll be great to hear from all of our artists and performers and writers. Just bringing up the whole realm of brain function, and obviously in the Alzheimer's patient, there is a loss of many aspects of brain function. However, I mean, something that's really very fascinating about work with the brain recently is the idea of neuroplasticity. I don't know if you've heard that term, but basically that the brain, I mean, we used to think, I mean, back, you know, when I went to medical school, the brain was this organ that you got, and then about age 20, you know, neurons started to drop out, and it was all downhill, and the brain could not change. It was just, you know, all a loss as life progressed. And that thinking has really changed dramatically, you know, through the work of neurologists working with stroke patients, with dementia patients.
So the Dalai Lama was interested in that.
Well, and I was just going to say the area that I'm very fascinated in, and you can see that I teach mindfulness-based stress reduction, is adapting meditation to patients. And so, you know, there's been some great work done by the Dalai Lama and his monks in conjunction with a very large group of premier neuroscientists around the country, the Mind and Life Institute there at Harvard and MIT and University of Wisconsin, you know, looking at the function of the brain and how the brain can change in patients who suffer from insults to the brain, or by our own practice, by deep meditation. There's many positive things that can come about in the brain. You're talking about the dementia patient reminded me of the work, I don't know if you're familiar with Jill Bolte Taylor, who wrote a really fascinating book, My Stroke of Insight.
Oh, yeah. Fabulous.
Really
Fabulous
wonderful book. At age 37, she had a major stroke in the left side of her brain. You know, she was this very, very accomplished neuroscientist, and during that very long rehabilitative process, which was remarkable, her mother, you know, really was very, very key in helping her go through a long period of rehab.
She needed sleep. Remember that?
Yeah, which was very astonishing because, you know, not so long ago she would have been consigned to the nursing home, but it was, and so her recovery is is a demonstration of how plastic the brain is. But during that long period of recovery, and she reflects on this in her book, she came to appreciate both the function of the left side of the brain and the right side of the brain. So the left side of the brain is the brain that, you know, many of us live in. You know, it's very rational, it's very busy, we think about things all the time, jumping from the past to the future, and very planning oriented, very rational, very goal oriented. And she knew that she had to work very, very hard to try to recover that. But in the meantime, there was this whole aspect of the right side of her brain that she loved being in. It was blissful, and it was universal, and it was very, very creative. And we think of the right side of the brain as being the seat of creativity to some extent. And I know I'm sort of ambulating through a lot of different ideas, but one thing about meditation is, you know, focusing the attention on the moment. I guess that's where I was leading to with creativity, is that in focusing the brain on the moment, there's a very, very heightened sense of awareness that I think is related to the creative process. At least it's, you know, it's shown in brainwave studies that when you meditate, your brain actually goes into a different type of brainwave, alpha waves, and that's related to, you know, kind of a different way of perceiving things. And so by that sort of circuitous introduction, and also I think playing on some things, ideas you brought up, Elinor, I was interested to hear people's ideas about that process of awareness and being in the moment. And I think artists, you know, connect with that, and also athletes. I mean, athletes, you know, really, really top athletes talk about being in the zone when they're very, very aware of the moment. And even, why am I blocking on the, Phil, the basketball coach, who's
Phil Jackson wrote his book on meditation. It's
who's
a fantastic
very
book.
into, you know, getting his players to really be in that state.
Zen in basketball.
Exactly, very, very heightened awareness. So I'm just wondering if your ideas and some of the ideas I've just said, if maybe any of you could reflect on being in that state of awareness. And because here's where I think I was trying to connect to, you know, leaving aside the great, great artists of our times, how about all of us and the potential for tapping into creativity by somehow connecting with that state of awareness that I think promotes creativity.
The actor's training, which is always controversial, all of it, though, in common parlance, focuses on the moment. And it's supposed to be that you live in the moment, and that you're not in the past, you're not in the future, you simply are where you are at that moment, and the next one, and the next one, and the next one. And the good actors do this after a while, automatically. The great actors even. That's right. Even more so.
Like so many people who go into any branch of theater. I started as an actor, and I had this kind of training. I have absolutely no doubt that it helped me so much as a caregiver to my mother.
Well, exactly, because I was relating to your pointing out, you know, a lot of the tragedy of Alzheimer's is that it's not the person you know, but, you know, and so there's all that sadness of having lost that person that you knew before, but I think there's actually even some approaches to caregiving, mindfulness-based caregiving, which is really all about being with the person where they are.
And I had some mindfulness training as well by this time.
Can you speak about that? I mean, how did that being in the moment with your mother help you?
Well, you need to let things go, of course. It could be, you know, you could be doing an archaeological dig to try to resurrect the last 5 minutes. So you stay. One day I'm trying to get my mother to the Kennedy Center. We're going to see the Playboy of the Western World. I knew she wouldn't get the plot at this point in her life, but she loved being seen, she loved seeing, she loved going to the theater always. And she was stuck in, Mother, we're late, we have to go. I know, I'm brushing my hair, and sew the hair. I was trying to find a way to cut that, and finally at the front door of an apartment building she lived in, I said, of her apartment, I said, Mother, there's a giraffe in the hallway. She dashed out. I grabbed her coat, I grabbed her, we were gone. Then something remarkable, and then I said, well, he went that way. I think she had already forgotten about the giraffe. We're walking down this hallway, and she says to me, is this a play? Is this a game? Or is this reality?
Oh, my God.
And this was not just about the giraffe, because that was, gone. It was where she was in her perception of life, that very, very smart woman, really a brilliant woman. She knew enough to know that there are different modes of perception, and you have different responses to them. If it's a game, there are rules. If it's a play, there's a kind of creative entertainment component. But then maybe reality is actually this way. And maybe reality actually doesn't have a foundation under it. It's an illusion that it does. And I mean, she was tapping into some of the most profound reflections that called around great artists. Life is a Dream, I'm thinking of right now. Well, my mother was being in the moment, I was being in the moment, and I rather dumbly said at that point, it's reality, Mother. I'm sorry that I kind of gave the wrong response. I didn't meet her at the level that she tapped into. I hope that's just one example of, trying to be nimble and realizing that every moment is new, and every moment can go from absurd to frustrating to absolutely profound.
Well, that's an artistic state in and of itself. I mean, that a state of unknowingness.
Yes.
Like a referendum effect.
Yeah.
It's like a living estrangement in which you see something.
Yeah.
All performers are in the moment. I mean, if you're physical, you better be, or you're going to hurt yourself. Or when I'm working with someone, I work with Jane Bloom, and she's playing instrument, I'm dancing instrument, we're one person. Always one person. I mean, we're in a group of people when we're dancing, we're all, as far as I'm concerned, we're one person. I know once that we had one of Glenn Tetley's piece, and there was a silence between each movement. And we were on tour, and the conductor took out the silence. And there we were, waiting to go on to do our silent movement, and he's on to the music. Well, we're all in different places on the stage. Well, everybody's eyes do this. It was the most remarkable thing, because somehow we made ourselves to the place, we got there and continued, because we were one. Everybody knew where they were supposed to be. I think children are always in the moment. They're focused on what they're doing. It's wonderful to watch them play, because they're really there. And I think when you say players, actors, we're all playing in a way. We're taking somebody else's vision and playing with it. But at the same time, all the invention of where I want to go, you get all kinds of pictures in your head. When I'm working and I have to teach my part to somebody else, I don't tell them what I'm thinking. I say, that's up to you, because I see something, you find your own thing. Otherwise it spoils it. Otherwise I'm putting creativity on. They have to find their own creativity. And that makes it interesting. And never try to impose it. So that makes it a piece interesting to work on. But I think we're all born with creativity. I think it's just knocked out of us. I mean, some people get it right away and some don't. And some feel that because I had cousin, Janet's sister, Betty, they all went to dance class together. And she said, I looked over and I saw Janet, and she's moving the little arms, and Janet, and maybe Betty was just as good, but she stopped right there, because what she saw Janet doing. And, or somebody looks at somebody and said, how wonderful, how wonderful. Well, there are late bloomers. There are people who sometimes I've seen dancers who are not very good in the beginning, and they stick, well, after a while, they're dynamite. But they're like flowers. Everybody's a different flower. And when we're young, I find that everybody, now it's everybody's a star after one hit record.
Yeah. Well, actually, that taps in, I mean, because you brought up a concept that I think is fascinating, and maybe some of you can comment on that as well, is you contrasted the role of the ego, the single person, and their self-importance, and then you contrasted that with kind of stepping out of the way of the ego and becoming one. You talk about being one with the group.
Right.
So I think that's another interesting concept about creativity. Is there something about being able to step out of the way of your own self-importance? And tell me about that.
You've got to put your ego outside of the studio door.
Why? What?
It
Tell me about.
doesn't work.
Well, otherwise
Spoiled.
you said so many things. Everybody's creative and creates, and we live in a left-brain world, and we honor our left-brained mathematicians, scientists, real estate people, whatever. They are, and art classes are cut, music classes are cut. I don't even know if they have dance classes. But in the book, My Stroke of Insight, she has this stroke, and the one side of her brain is totally flooded with blood.
Her left brain.
Her left brain. And she wants to call for help, and she can't remember how to dial. And she can't remember. Well, what happens is, I have read the book a while back, but it's the right side, the creative side, that helped her figure out how to get to the telephone, how to grunt on the telephone, because she couldn't even speak at that time, and how to save her life. So the creative spirit is it. And for Alzheimer's patients, for all of us, it's something that should be encouraged in this society, and we are all flowers, as you said.
Well, yeah, I mean, look, you go to museums, and it's thousands of years of creativity, and nobody ever repeats the same thing.
And the kids today, in their freshman year, want to already be in Art Miami Basel. They already, like that. Grace Hardigan said to me, my students I used to say to my teachers, we'd say, what can we do for you? And now the students are saying, what can you do for me? And I was going to say before, in terms of time, I've been working on a piece 8 years. It's a piece of sculpture. They hang around my studio. Some happen fast and some are slow. I don't think you could find one young artist. I mean, they are the hysteria and the desperation of this society. So, me too. I said, what am I doing? Why am I taking so long? And then I thought, it's okay. Now, that comes with age. That comes with, you sort of been there, done that, seen it. I've been the hot young rebel that threw paint 50 feet across the room. There's another thing that happens, and there's another kind of wisdom. And information, we have so much information.
Too much.
I don't know. You've seen so much. You've read so much.
Too much.
Too much.
I don't know if it's too much. I think we have trouble remembering names sometimes. But we have this information, and it gets into my work. It's all there. All I know about line, composition, color, technique, form, all of the artist's work. I must have millions of paintings in my head. And all of you have a lot. I mean, I could say to you, Vermeer's Lady with a Jug. You all know. I was talking about Rembrandt's Lake. You all know. Anyhow, all of that, when you age, goes into your creative process. It's not that you're just trying to do the hottest, latest, flashiest thing. So I think there's something very important about age in this society that should be honored. And the wisdom that comes from age. In this very fast-paced, it's not even 15 minutes of fame now, it's 2 seconds of fame that everybody seems to be after. There are definite things that you get, along with the awful things like double chins.
Patricia, is there some, from a medical point of view, is there some, in terms of this neuroplasticity idea and also the nature of brain function, is there a certain level of disinhibition that, because I know they've talked about, you know, in nursing homes, they've had a problem now with venereal disease, you know, is there a certain creative disinhibition also that might be, you know, that might cross the line into dementia, but is there a disinhibiting process? Are there less of the ego functions which can get in the way of, you know, creative productivity?
Well, I think that's a great question. I mean, what you mentioned, you know, we think of as a negative aspect of people when they experience dementia. They have social disinhibition, and so they act out in ways that are considered not socially desirable, including, you know, sexual activity, which, I mean, you know, there's a lot of discussion around that, is, you know, to what extent, when two adults, you know, consent to participate, I mean, what level of cognition do you need to be able to say that it's a consenting adult? So, you know, that gets into a lot of, no, really, it can, I mean, it can be, it's a problem in nursing homes, but there's a tendency to deny people sexual expression, you know, if they're at all cognitively impaired, which is unfortunate. But so you're talking about maybe not that.
No, I'm talking about repressive. I'm using an overall terminology in the repression area, but many people who are involved in creative pursuit talk about blocking. You know, so that's more what I'm talking about.
Well,
and that when that function of the brain becomes lessened, then hence, and also I'm talking about. I wanted to ask you also about memory in terms of brain function.
I mean, I don't know that I can give a, you know, very erudite answer to your question, except that I think it touches on a number of the themes that I was interested in bringing up, which is, you know, you talked about the wisdom that we have, and to what extent, you know, what are there things that happen in aging that would promote the flow of creativity and wisdom? And I think you're asking, is there something about, might we become less repressed, less inhibited as we get older? Because why? Because we're not constrained by certain other responsibilities, because we're willing to step out of the way of our own ego, because we learn more how to be in the moment, you know, because
we know we're going to die anyhow.
Well, again, right, and
but less judgmentally.
No, but if I can, I mean, because that's a great question. To what extent does an awareness of mortality and the finitude of life perhaps maybe bring us more to an appreciation of the moment? I mean, that's a great area of richness, is to appreciate the beauty of the moment. You know,
but that sense of mortality drives certain, the figures I'm talking about anyway, and others, to actually do two things. One, not to be concerned, as you're not concerned, if it's going to take you 8 years or more, just to get on with it. And in the case of Verdi, to keep it a secret that he's doing this work, because he may not finish it.
Well, that's a concern.
And he's very clear about that. Oddly enough, I discovered only a few days ago that Benjamin Britten did exactly the same thing with Death in Venice before he approached it. He was only in his 60s, but he knew he was going to die somewhere in the next 4 or 5 years, probably. But he didn't want anybody to know, really, that he, except his collaborators, that he was doing this work. I think that it's speculation and guesswork, of course, the way everybody writes biographies these days. Just so might have been, could have been, you know. My sense is that what they discovered, I'm not sure about what I'm discovering, is that it's essential to stop time in the work itself.
It's beautiful.
And once that's done, you still have time. You still have time. And silence is a very important part, as it was one reason why I've been fascinated, because when I started this some years ago, it wasn't a big concern. Then it's gathered force. Posthumously, the group published Said's book on late styles. It can be argued here or there in various places, but it's an important series of groups of essays. And now there's more and more interest in it. But one of the signs of it has been, even just a few weeks ago, the discovery that young Schubert can be looked upon as a person locked into late style with both Winterreise, the Winter Journey, and the Schwanengesang, which is not, technically speaking, a storytelling cycle. But if you link that with Samuel Beckett, suddenly you're in a world, as they just did recently, which reminds you that that's what the subject is, stopping time and honoring silence.
That's so interesting, Gordon, that there are certain artists in which stopping time becomes almost the subject of the art, which
That's
is
right.
different from
That's-
being the mechanism of the art. And I think Gertrude Stein was somebody for whom that flow, and she talked about being in the now and being in the
Yeah.
present. And her whole theory of a landscape play was to be in a kind of presence rather than in a kind of a historical sequence. In fact, going to the theater always disturbed Stein because you always had to figure out what was later and what was earlier, and then you had to look at the list of characters to catch up with it, and so you yourself were prevented from being in the now. And just a sort of PS to that, Thornton, which you all know, of course, very well, better than I do probably, Thornton Wilder went to Paris, sat at her feet, talks about having learned being in the now from Stein, and of course,
Yeah.
one of his famous mots was, in the theater, it's always now.
So that's right.
I don't think he learned that only from Gertrude Stein.
No, no.
And I'm wondering whether or not in the 20th century we have
Stops profane
more of a
time.
kind of art. Is it possible we have a kind of art in which being present and doing less editing, as for instance Beethoven did madly, is more of a modernist phenomenon?
A line from Jill Bolte Taylor's book just jumps out at me when she said that creativity begins with chaos. And then, so again, being in the moment, it may seem like it doesn't make any sense, but then something emerges from it. I think it's kind of counterintuitive to think that people who have a sense of their mortality, at least some, would be able to not just be so locked into a sense of the passage of time, but more that they're able to let that drop away and be in the moment. It's almost like knowing that time is passing and will come to an end allows an appreciation of the moment and the sweetness of the moment.
That's what these Ibsen play. I mean, Master Builder and I mean, When We Did Awaken. I mean, this is the theme. I mean, that's the theme of the play, actually.
What is the theme of the play?
Well, I mean, especially in Master Builder. I mean, what does he say? The house. I haven't read it in about 30 years. The house he's building the house in the air, or the house in the sky.
Yes.
Yeah,
Castle
and
in the
this
air.
impossible. The going after. I mean, the going after the impossible. The climb, the seeking, and the search for something which doesn't exist in a certain sense. I mean, there's that. I mean, the liberation from the material world, and it's really what you're talking about, because I think what she was saying was in a certain sense it has to do with a certain type of perverse hope almost, that you can do something in defeat of the kind of the deciduous nature of human existence. In a certain
But aren't you always, you're always searching in creativity. You never stop because it's forever. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. And I think now, I mean, if you look at the world now, I'm looking at a lot of young people because I'm around a lot of young people, and you got the hip hoppers and the ballet people and the this people and the actors, and they're all getting together and they're just throwing, they're like in a good big sandbox having a wonderful time. It's a lot of creativity going on. Young people who've never had, they're using words like choreography and things like that, and it's quite exciting in a way. But it adds something to me. I'm getting a lot out of it too. Have you heard this group in Los Angeles, the Crumpers? You ever heard Crumping?
No.
Dance? Oh my goodness. Well, these young people are from the street in Watts area where I lived when I was living. And they found a way of getting through life without, it's because they don't have psychiatrists, they don't have anything. They come from the worst backgrounds I've ever heard of. There's a film called Rise, R-I-Z-E.
Yeah, that's a great one.
One must see that. Because these children are brilliant. But how do they do it? They do it by movement. because all our emotions end up stuck in our body muscles forever. And when you're mad, it's going to stick somewhere. It's going to be there forever. They get it out by, if you want to call it dancing, but it's a form of possession. It's not hip-hop. It's a form of possession because the body is violently moving. They never hurt themselves, and they'll battle one another, but they'll do it by movement. And that is the way they said that keep from hurting each other. That is their way to keep from ending up like their mothers, their fathers, their brothers, their sisters. They take care of each other, but the movement, you can't believe it's so fast and so violent, but they never, it's so beautiful. And they'll say, well, that's the way we do it. If we have to do it this way. And they're very strict with each other. It's all creative. They get together and got to get the movement. And if you're late, don't come. They are really strict. Little ones, we call them little mama, this little girl this big. They're all ages. And they even they get like a boxing ring. One side, this is the other side. And they dress up like clowns. They all have their makeup. And they'll battle. Women, men, doesn't matter. Battle. But that is their way to keep from losing their minds. And that's a form of creativity, but it's kind of a primitive form of creativity if you want. It was their only way that they could keep from dying in the streets. While their homies are out being shot, then they go and dance. You see, one man, I can't remember, Jimmy the Clown. He was in prison and he got out, made himself a clown, went in the neighborhood and got all this kind of movement going. And it's fascinating. But creativity, it goes anywhere. It can be there. It's in the paintings. It's in jewelry making. It's in making sweaters. It's just there, and it makes people happy.
Carmen, you brought up another theme that we haven't really explored, but just to maybe look at it, you talked about interaction between generations and kind of cross-pollination from the wisdom of the older artist and youth, and I think that's something that is lacking to a large extent in our society. I just want to look at one of my colleagues sitting in the front row, Louis Peleus, who's a Tai Chi master and teaches Tai Chi to some of our older patients at the Martha Stewart Center, and he pointed out to me before we started that if we were in the East sitting among his Tai Chi masters, that it wouldn't be the same kind of discussion because there they are revered, and it is the elders who really are looked to for their wisdom, their creativity, whereas in this society, I think we pointed out there's a tendency to cast off the wisdom and the creativity and the of our elders. So that idea of the cross-pollination, I think, is an interesting theme as well.
Well, it's very nice. Chuck Davis, who's in the Carolinas, and he teaches from Africa, a lot of African dancing. He teaches his young people to revere the elders. When we have these meetings and whatnot, I am an elder, and I'm called Mama Carmen.
So you're specifically identified as
with the
an
elders,
elder.
and they will come to you, and these kids will even go down, touch the floor.
Wow.
And they would do, I've had that happen. I went to Fela to see the performance, and my husband and I, Jeffrey Holder, were sitting there. And in the beginning, they're all the kids, it's not a curtain goes up. It's when you walk in the theater, you're in a nightclub. And I saw some of the kids, and they'll kind of look at you, and they'll bow like this. And as they pass very quickly, they'll, it really makes you feel, then you don't feel, there's no such thing as old. You're just moving on, and it's the reverence that those young people have. It gives you a whole other, it makes me feel like I can go forever. Because you're respected for, you're not treated that you're old. There's no such thing as old. The pyramids are old.
But you're revered and you're respected because of your skills and your accomplishment and your knowledge and your ability.
Yes, but then that passes to them because then they will say, oh, I'm this because I saw you do such and such, so that's how I got on the stage or whatnot. It makes you feel very good, that you've accomplished something.
Sure.
It's passing down.
So I'd like to, I'm sorry.
Yes.
Well,
We'll get to both of you. Okay.
All right. You choose.
Audrey, go ahead. Then I'm coming back to you.
Well, when Gordon said something about stopping time, that art stops time, I think that's very important. And I brought this one thing from another book that I'm writing on, the sequel to Art and Soul. And it's why you can't live without art. And that is creativity, you know. And I say real estate goes up and down, the art market goes up and down, but the actual art itself has a life of its own apart from the hype, the glitz, the glamour, or the fashion of the times. Art can shock, as Robert Hughes said in Shock of the Real, but a one-liner is a one-liner and has a short life. Art, to be lasting, must contain a myriad of elements: form, color, technique, composition, skill. You know, all of these things come with aging and with knowledge and with the wisdom that we gather. It has to be deep, wide, and high enough to deliver its message. When it's great enough, it lasts through many lifetimes and contributes to the continuity of cultural history. All right, in the long run, art is something you can't live without because it stops profane time. And it provides a place for the soul to reflect and take refuge as it deals with the blows that life deals each one of us. Each of us has to face the fact of our mortality and the mortality of those we love. Art helps us deal with this brutal fact. It can soothe the heart, spark the brain, and touch the deepest part of us. And our society sure needs more of it, you know.
That's just
and
lovely.
I think art only gets better and deeper as the people who create it age.
There can be the damaging episode that damages forever. In the case of Ibsen, that stroke.
In the case of de Kooning, his Alzheimer's.
That's probably a little, maybe a bit different, but the fascinating anecdote.
Kooning painted with Alzheimer's.
is
at least.
that Ibsen remarked to his wife at one point, look at me, a playwright all my life, and I can only write A-N-D. I think it was just, and it takes me hours.
But his brain
And then,
was there, right?
Yes, and then somebody was there to hear it. He was in this deep sleep, and he suddenly shot up and he says, "I'm writing a play." It was about a year before he actually died. He never wrote another play, but he was writing it.
In his head.
Yes,
That's a common thing that happens before in the late, very close to death, isn't it, when people wake up suddenly?
I wanted to come back to Ibsen. Actually, we clearly went in the wrong order here because what you said was so beautiful and valedictory, and I'm really adding a layer of complication here, but I'm thinking about these late plays of Ibsen and the way he treated the aging figure. And here I would have to say that he mocked them mercilessly. And his ironies are bottomless. That this Solness in Master Builder is terrified that he's losing his skills and losing his creativity. And he'll crush anybody, ruin anybody, break anybody, and use anybody in order to forestall that. Finally ends up killing himself.
How does he spell his name?
Solness.
And I was
Furthermore, he was a
thinking of
child. He was a
SOUL.
child molester, so he was always a son of a bitch. And then you come to
Soulless.
John Gabriel Borkman,
Masterpiece.
and it's a masterpiece. But those old figures in that play are like mummies, actually, like frozen, like Strindberg's figures in the Ghost Sonata. You know, they're already dead, and and it's a really big mistake to play these figures, full of the glow of age and sentimentality and so forth, the way it's often done. And, and they've just got this icy grip and they're trying to keep the son at home, and he has to escape and go to the South and have some sex, and, And finally, the very last one, which I would love to hear Gordon speak to, because I know you've given it so much thought, When We Dead Awaken, where he's looking at the aged couple, it's like chamber music, and the young couple, and it's an impossible choice, it seems to me. I mean, they are both so lacking in wholeness. Where do you go with that?
Well, I mean, as you say, chamber music, but getting back to something else, which is the form and style, I think that play is really an unfinished work.
You do?
Yes.
And James Joyce thought it was the greatest.
I know he did, and there's this conflict. I have it in the essay about Ingmar Bergman thinking that it's unfinished and not successful, whereas Borkman is the most successful. I agree with that. But at the same time, Bergman decided to do away with the third act as written when he did it. In effect, say that Borkman was already dead in the last act. He's so smart, Bergman, to go there a little, somewhat ahead of Ibsen, actually, so that it has a finish that extends into that landscape deeper than even Ibsen intended in the writing of it. But where the previous acts of Borkman, the first act and the second act, are, I think, the most perfect instrumentations that he ever wrote, both of them. And that's why I'm sorry to sort of, I'm not really dodging When We Dead Awaken, but in a way maybe I am, because I keep focusing on those two acts. The first one, because there is no, it's something that James remarked upon, there's no small talk anymore. It's absolutely dead on from the moment, not about closing doors or opening doors or exiting an entrance and maneuvering people so that they can have a confrontation. They just have it. And they never waste a word. It isn't about, oh, you look fine, your clothes were sweet, and fine, and then let's get down to the point. It is right down to the point. Then in the second act, you've been hearing the pacing of Borkman up above.
That's the most magnificent thing.
Which is an extraordinary. Again, the absent character to me sometimes has such power. And how is he going to be when you meet him? When you meet him, he's listening. At first, he meant him to be listening to Beethoven, as if it had been music that he had heard in the mines. Well, it couldn't be. He couldn't have heard Beethoven playing in the mines on a piano or anywhere. But he changed the music as his little Foldal's daughter is playing for him just to entertain him. And he's in this
She's playing the Dance of Death.
That's right. And which seemed more apt, I think, from Ibsen's point of view at that point. But it's only after she leaves that Borkman sees old Ekdal, her supposed father, who was one of the people he hurt most mercilessly with his manipulations and his financial dealings. But old Ekdal is there to show him a play he has written and to get his critical judgment on the play. It's a complete departure from the major tale that's being told in a way. And as Bergman remarks, and I don't think he's alone. I go there in this essay. It's very weirdly like The Fool and Lear, that really is meeting on the heath, but also it's a Beckett scene. It is this strange confrontation between the old man who had no ambitions at all, and that's the old Ekdal, and the extremely overripe ambitiousness of Borkman.
Who's posing as Napoleon.
That's right.
With his hand in his vest as he comes in, as Ekdal comes in.
Gordon, that's really brilliant. One of the problems, we're a little tight on time, and we wanted to let the audience. A brilliant place to act as a demarcation between the audience and the panel.
I think we sort of came to what we might say is the full catastrophe, from the wisdom and the reverence for older artists and the transcendence of creative expression living on, and then on the other side, these manifestations of aging. So maybe that is a good point.
I think anyone who would like to come up, please come to the microphone, identify yourself, and ask questions or pose
questions, comments, your own experience.
Hi. I'm Jeremy Mack. I'm a psychiatrist here in the city. In terms of aging and creativity, when you go to the Picasso Museum in Paris, you have this opportunity to see Picasso early and late. And you see, late, all of the delicacy or whatever is gone, and there are broad strokes and bright colors. and he's, let go of the script, something, I don't know. And you can also see it in therapy also. People who are, earlier on in the 50s and 60s when there was a more kind of regular blank screen sort of way of doing treatment. As they get older, they stop caring about that. They tend to get to be more interested in being self-revelatory. Apparently there's some sense that they have of what is more important. So these two things, I think, and these two are similar, and I'd be interested in hearing, since you've been talking about the final stages in art, as to what you think.
About Picasso, is that it?
I'm sorry. Well, what is meant by final style?
I don't know yet. I really don't. I don't want to. One of the things I should have not come here, and I should have not published yet these what I've already done, because in a sense I should have been more protective the way Verdi was, because I don't know the ending. And I don't think that any of them knew the ending when they began these late works. That's one thing common to them. And I don't know if I'm going to get to the ending. That's something I wrestle with every day. So the determination of what is the late style, is it elegiac only? Or is it, in fact, extremely playful? I think probably in some cases it's elegiac, as in Strauss. In Matisse's case, clearly it was playful. But what was he playing with? In Matisse's case, he was playing with color, and he was playing with his incapacity. He couldn't paint. And there's two parts of the incapacity. One was that he had a really serious operation, and he had a colostomy. He doesn't tell anybody that, but he says, in 1945, the war is over, I can't paint in oils anymore. Of course he can't. He can't get up, he's in a wheelchair, or he's in his bed. He's physically disabled. But he goes on, and we know how he went on, cutouts with a long paintbrush and all the rest. And it's extremely playful and great fun to contemplate and to look at. And I think much more accomplished, by the way, than late Picasso. But this is, we've been wrestling then with taste and arguments about taste. I think it's common to both, to the experience to feel not sentimental ever, but either perhaps nostalgic, elegiac on the one side, or extremely ready to play another game on the other side.
But in terms of, if you can talk about artists having judgments about what they want to express, certainly there is a change from young to old, and therapists too, about what kind of product they want to create.
Thank you. We have another question. Sue.
Yeah, hi. I'm Sue Shapiro, and I had wished that there was somebody who could speak more directly to late Beethoven, but meanwhile, he seems to be,
he weaves in and out.
He weaves in and out, and that it seems there that what he creates towards the end is something that's like out of the mainstream from where he came, and then it doesn't directly lead. It sort of goes into its own space that is quite transcendent. But what I was curious about, when you mentioned that the Verdi, he has a fugue, and so I was wondering about that, about late Beethoven and then having a fugue, and the tightening, and what that might be about.
Well, one reason I don't plan any concentrated chapter on Beethoven is because Maynard Solomon has already done it just brilliantly, and so he's just a model. I go to him for inspiration and for facts as well. I think one of the facts is the contrapuntal writing, and in late Beethoven, and the other, as we all recognize it, is the trill. And I don't know what to make of that yet, but it's always happening, whether it's in the violins or in the piano, the late piano works, and then finally, and the fugue as well in Beethoven. But just to go there very briefly from my, not from an essay, but just from a proposal. You always have to write proposals, what you're doing. And I said it's oddly Wagner, who is cited by Solomon on this very subject, is always reading Beethoven to discover what he, Wagner, hasn't quite known before. Suddenly he sees that Beethoven's last works, this is Wagner, shared the same structure as the early ones. Now we would argue most of us, that it's different, that he's discarding the structures of the early ones. But Wagner says no, that it is the same structure, and almost to his surprise, again, Wagner, he declares that despite comparing structures, Wagner finds himself wondering at the entirely new world which meets us there almost in precisely the same form. And I just went on to say, I prefer to suggest that with these artists, the structures have been liberated and reconceived, transformed, metamorphosis all the time. The forms themselves deliberately given limits. Late works, yes, some of them less content than others with fading lights, others finding light and shade, yet all suffused with a startling energy that is its own defiance of the final blow. And one of the things that I noticed in Beethoven was, I got through a performer, Piotr Andrzejewski, who gives a little essay in his performance of Diabelli Variations, which was done as a film on DVD, and I really commend it to everybody. And in that he says, these were not really meant to be called variations. This is a trivial, almost non-existent theme. It couldn't be more absurd. Beethoven took this theme given to all the composers of the day. Schubert did one. He begins actually playing the Schubert variations. He said, they're not, and then just in an act of utter perversity, he says, I can't write the variation you want. He writes 32. Typical of Beethoven. And in this, as Andrzejewski says, these are not variations, they are transformations. Yes. 32 transformations. And you come, if you wanted a kind of neat package, which I tend to shy away from, but okay, I'll share it with everybody. You come forward to Goethe, the Metamorphoses, and Strauss's Metamorphoses. And I haven't, oddly enough, the class, young people were most interested of the five. And there were actually, I added Britten and Thomas Mann. They were most interested in Ingmar Bergman. It shouldn't be a surprise. They know the films and they can see them. And I haven't talked at all about Bergman, but that would help a little bit too.
You have another question here?
Just one last thing.
Yeah.
I think that late Beethoven also shows how, at least I think that the older pianists and the older performers have a wisdom to be able to play that.
That's right.
And the younger, technically flashy, can do it, but they don't have yet the soul for it, I think.
I think there's no question. You see young pianists, if they announce they're doing the late sonatas of Beethoven, you know it's not going to work.
Right.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Joan Flesh, and I left corporate America a few years ago, and now I'm a jeweler, and I design and make jewelry. And I think you mentioned this, that creativity is knocked out of us, and I think that one of the jobs that we have is to sort of try and reconnect with our creativity and peel back the layers of acculturation. So my question is, I think meditation is a route to tap into creativity, but I was wondering if you had any other ideas on how we might sort of, push the envelope and reconnect with our childhood and be more creative. Thank you.
Well, just do it.
Whatever it
Pick
is.
up everything, just attack it. I don't know. It takes courage because everybody said, I've never done this before. I've never done that before. I've never done this before. Well, why not just do it? I mean, what have you got to lose?
Yeah, I think that's right. When Philip Glass was asked the other day, what is the description of a composer versus like a musician who's tapped into to music, the oral senses, and dance, the visual, and so forth. He said, how would you describe a composer? And Philip Glass said, as conquering fear, sometimes relating to fear.
Yeah.
Thank you. Olga?
My name is Olga Halik Kohin and I, we together created this exhibition, and I would like to tell something about my experience. One of my favorite artists is El Greco, and several years ago I went to Metropolitan to see his works. And what I saw there, and you probably know his distorted proportions, deep colors, and I sort of went to Metropolitan to see his exhibitions, and there was his works before he was 50. And that was awful. There was flat colors, very simple. No no disinteresting proportions, nothing. And I thought how these artists who just no, absolutely not interested for me became this one of my favorite. And I knew that he has some kind of eye disease. Probably he got it in 50s, and probably we start to theorize that, okay, he got this disease, and because of this disease, he started to see these colors and proportions, but probably not. Probably before that, he was this desperation in hysteria in competition with other artists. And when he got to 50, he just stopped to care about to be this kind of state and start to create his vision, how he see it, and became one of the famous artists. That's also, for example, about Umberto Eco. He created his most famous, first famous work. He was in The Name of the Rose when he was in the mid-50s. So it's probably
Umberto Eco.
Umberto Eco. It's probably, of course, it's individual for different people, and different people start to have this vision and come to this through their personal experience. I personally also start to understand how I could present my works not so long ago. But again, this state of desperation and hysteria rising and rising and rising with all this new technology and all the space of creating new things, and we already don't have time to really understand what we are doing. That's probably what I wanted to say.
Thank you.
We have another question. Go ahead.
This isn't quite a question, it's sort of more a confession. As you can see, I speak from experience. I'm a late bloomer. My pediatrician gave up on me not long ago, and my geriatrician assures me I'm 100% recyclable. Between that, I've written 4 books now in the last 7 or 8 years, published. I'm still working on more, and I teach and work in a hospital. And I was very impressed with the work you did with your mother, because it seems to be it's right on with what I try to teach my students. You have to work with the patient in terms of what he's got, not what he's lost. And what the patient is doing, not what he's not doing. They all try to be correctives, to be teachers in a sense. Get it right. There isn't any right. The point is the patient's always right. Your job to figure out why and how, what the premises are, and talk to the patient in terms of what he's doing, not what he's not doing. And it's interesting, our reflections on the brain are very interesting, because the brain, I was taught in college that the brain was a finished object, and there was no more room to grow in the head, obviously, so it only could lose. Well, it's not true, of course. But the brain does begin with many more synapses than it needs, and early development is about pruning them. And I think in late life, the same thing goes on. Even though the brain is plastic, it prunes, and I think Alzheimer's, it does us a favor by doing some of the pruning for us, but leaves us with some things that one can work with. And like all good artists, you work with what you've got, whether it's a Matisse or Beethoven or any of us. And I think to make use of what you have and to find how to make it plausible, at least to yourself, maybe somebody will judge it as creative, but at least you preserve your activity, your sense of agency, and you produce.
Thank you. I think that's a wonderful note to finish.
We have one more person. One more, yeah, we have time for one more.
Okay, well, I'm
Who are you?
I don't know how to make, Anne-Marie Levine. I used to be a musician. When I was 40, I began to be a poet. I published books of poetry, I write prose, and then visual art came 10 years ago. So, okay, I performed and created from nothing. So this has been very interesting. I mean, I think it's a little unfair that we talk mostly about artistic creativity, because creativity exists in so many ways, in so many fields, and we've just sort of, not said anything about, except a little bit about mathematicians and so on. But, I mean, people can be creative in a variety of ways. So this is just a bunch of notes that I had so many thoughts while you were all talking. If you had time, you could pick up on some of them. But I was thinking about Beethoven the whole time. I think he died when he was about 57, which was old for then, okay? And especially given, the romantic Schumann and Chopin, all who died in their 30s, and Mozart. So it was old for then, okay. And he had been struggling with this hearing loss, really practically complete, for a while. I don't think anyone would say that the late Beethoven is any less than the earlier middle. I mean, no one would say that. But he couldn't hear. And I'm thinking just that, you know, reality got out of the way, and he got to hear things he would never have heard if he could have heard all those instruments all the time, and that maybe it was a blessing in a certain way, because old people do have to deal with infirmity more than young people. There's a poet named Edmond Jabez, who's a French-Egyptian, he died, but he's a French-Egyptian poet, died recently. And he wrote that your body is always involved in what you do, i.e., for instance, he had asthma, which, do any of you know the poetry of Edmond Jabez? It's written in aphorisms. It's sort of about the Holocaust, but it doesn't really say so. There are dialogues between rabbis and so on. But it's aphoristic and it's in fragments. And he said he has asthma. And if he has a lot of white space on the page, but space between the text, it makes him feel he can breathe better. So he writes in fragments. And it's just one of the many ways that your physical situation at any age can affect your art. This wasn't about old age, really. It was about that. Okay. These are my thoughts. Matisse, finally you mentioned at the end. I wanted to mention two opposite figures, I think. Sibelius, who in the middle of his life
I was about
said,
to.
I'm not going to write anymore. And like he lived another, I don't know how many years.
50 years.
50 years, I thought so.
Same with Rossini.
I was going to say, Sibelius and Rossini have not been mentioned, and they just quit. And they didn't die either. They just quit. I don't know if anybody has an explanation for that. Verdi, who wrote his two probably greatest works at the end, Othello and Falstaff, I guess, yes. Then I was thinking about the Peer Gynt myth, really, not so much the play, but isn't it interesting that Ibsen picked that early on? When you think what happens in Peer Gynt, the man leaves his wife or girlfriend, whoever she is, and says, wait for me, and goes wandering around the world. He doesn't come back until they're both very old, ready to die. So what does that mean? I mean, that's an early play on the part of Ibsen, and well, I just leave it. That's a question. Then everybody forgot Stanley Kunitz, our poet laureate twice, who lived to 101, and he had his full capacity the whole time. I mean, he slowed down. He wrote less, but he never wrote that much anyway. But it was still there. And he had a period a few years before he died when everyone thought he was going to die. He went into a kind of a sleep. And eventually he wanted to come home. He'd wake up and he'd go to sleep. He'd wake up and he'd go to sleep. They thought he was going to die. So they brought him home, put him in bed in the living room, and invited everyone he knew to come and say goodbye. And so the living room was full of people, and Stanley was lying there in a hospital bed. And, you'd go near him, and eventually he'd wake up and he'd say, oh, hi, how are you? And then he'd go, now, what are you working on? That was the first thing. And then he'd listen, and he heard you, and then he'd go back to sleep. He'd comment on it and go back to sleep. It's just really interesting what happens. I have this list. I should probably stop. Louise Bourgeois, I did want to say she is 90 whatever, and she is still working. But in my opinion, she's repeating herself. She's doing the same thing over and over again, and she's increasingly moved into herself, which I don't think is very interesting, because after all, art is communication. I think it's less. Okay, some people agree with me, but. I mean, sure, she keeps working. We all want to keep. Well, artists usually want to keep working, but it's not necessarily good. We haven't said that, but sometimes it's not so good. Okay.
Thank you very much.